What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my Week 5 top 36 wide receiver rankings. This is the first week where we have buys, so certainly some fantasy-relevant wide receivers that are going to be out of your lineup. The Falcons, Bears, Packers, and Steelers all are not going to play this week, so you might have to dig a little bit deeper into your bench. Hopefully, these rankings can help you guys out. Let's just dive right into it here. Starting off in tier 1, I'm just going with the clear-cut top 2 wide receivers to start off the season. It is Puka Nacua and Amon-Ra St. Brown. And honestly, for Puka Nacua here, this has just been an absurd start. The dude is averaging 27.4 PPR points per game without hitting in the touchdown department. He has scored 2 touchdowns, and he's averaging over 27 points per game. Puka's absolutely absurd. If we were redrafting for fantasy football, he would be the clear-cut 101. I mean, he could be carrying you guys to your championships. And then Amon-Ra St. Brown also just been a really, really strong option. Now, looking at tier 2, 3 guys in this tier, we have Jackson Smith and Jigba, Justin Jefferson, and Garrett Wilson. For JSN, just a super strong start to the season. He's averaging over 100 yards per game, consistent volume, very high weekly floor. Didn't have, the most amazing week 4, but still a fine overall fantasy day. Still a high-end wide receiver 1. Then we're going to go with Justin Jefferson. After kind of a slow start to the season, he's looked good in back-to-back weeks. Ton of volume in week 4. He's gone for at least 75 receiving yards in each of the last 3 games. The offensive line is a concern. I mean, Carson Wentz was just getting completely pummeled in week 4, but I also think this is a matchup where they're going to struggle to run the ball. The passing volume should be fine against the Browns. And then my final wide receiver in this tier, it's going to be Garrett Wilson going up against the Cowboys. This might seem high at wide receiver 5, just given the passing environment he's in, but on the season, he is the wide receiver 5 in points per game. This is a smash matchup here against the Cowboys. They are giving up the most fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position, and it's not even close. Their Cowboys give up 7 points per game more than the second worst defense at stopping fantasy wide receivers. So I think this is going to be a big game for Garrett Wilson. He did have the impressive touchdown catch. Without the offensive PI, he had another amazing catch that could have been a touchdown. I think they're going to have to make an effort to get him the ball more. I think we can see that moving forward, an uptick in volume. I do like him here as a strong mid-tier wide receiver 1. Then moving into tier 3, going to start off this tier with George Pickens, and he's coming off a monster week 4. CeeDee Lamb out of the lineup. Dak Prescott still looked great. This offense looked really strong in a really tough matchup against the Packers, and George Pickens had a monster day. 11 targets, 8 receptions for 134 yards and 2 touchdowns. If he's going to get that type of volume and this offense is going to look that good, I think he is a wide receiver 1, until CeeDee Lamb is back in the lineup. Then a wide receiver 7, going to go with Nico Collins. Kind of an underwhelming start to the season, but he's been fine over the last few weeks. Obviously, we know he's super talented. Also, a pretty decent matchup. This Ravens defense is just super banged up, and they've already been allowing the 5th most points per game to fantasy wide receivers. And then we have the rookie stud, Emeka Egbuka. This dude is just so unbelievably good. He's the wide receiver 8 in points per game through 4 weeks. He's consistently improved on his target numbers, going from 6 to 7 to 8, all the way up to a season high, career high with 10 targets in week 4. You just have to keep firing him up as a lock in your lineup. A few more guys in this tier. We have Jamar Chase going up against the Lions. Now, I understand if you're just extremely frustrated with Jamar Chase. This has been back-to-back underwhelming games. The Bengals' passing attack has just looked completely anemic. He went 5 for 50 in week 3, then 5 for 23 in week 4 on Monday Night Football. I will point out, though, that this is probably as bad as it can get. These are 2 really tough matchups that they went up against: the Vikings in week 3, the Broncos in week 4. They're going to have some better matchups moving forward. I think it's pretty clear we're not going to get the Jake Browning success that we saw in 2023, but I still think Jamar Chase is just so talented. He still has to be in your lineups. I get it if you're annoyed. Trust me, in the spots where I have Jamar Chase, it is not pretty, but I'm still going to have him as a wide receiver 1 at this point. Then I'm going to go with Zay Flowers. Strong start to the season, had the one down game in week 3, but he's still averaging 15.2 points per game while only getting into the end zone one time. We will have to, wait for the status of Lamar Jackson. That could definitely affect Zay Flowers. I would bump him down if Lamar is going to miss time, but I would expect Lamar to play in this game. And then the final player in tier 3, it's going to be Deebo Samuel going up against the Chargers. He's also just had one down game this season, but 17 plus in 3 of the 4. Terry McLaurin banged up. Seems like he might be trending to play, but I still definitely prefer Deebo as the top option in this wide receiver room. I will say if Terry's back, maybe you just bump Deebo down into tier 4, but still someone who I think is a really nice option. And then kicking off tier 4, we're going to go with Devontae Adams. He's hit at least 50 receiving yards in all 4 games. He scored touchdowns in the last 3. I mean, he is just a really, really strong number 2 behind Puka Nacua. Matthew Stafford looks good. These guys are obviously the clear-cut top 2 targets. Devontae Adams is a fringe wide receiver 1 for me. Then I'm going with Quentin Johnston. Heading into week 4, I believe I ranked all 3 of the Chargers wide receivers back to back to back. I think I went Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnston, Keenan Allen. We're now 4 weeks into the season. That's a decent sample size. I just have to put some respect on Quentin Johnston's name. He's been a monster. He's been the wide receiver 4 in points per game. In his 4 performances, he's put up 24.9, 15.9, 14.9, and then 23.8 PPR points. He's commanding consistent volume. I think the only thing, if you wanted to nitpick Quentin Johnston, would just be the injury to Joe Alt, where Johnston is more of that downfield threat. And so you could make the argument that if Herbert's going to have to get rid of the ball quicker, maybe the connection isn't quite there, but we saw the offensive line really struggle with Alt leaving in the first half of week 4, and Quentin Johnston had his second best game of the season, first if we're just talking about overall volume and yardage. So Quentin Johnston, he has to be a lock in your lineup. This is no longer some fluke through a few weeks. It seems like he's just a late bloomer in the NFL. He went in round 1 for a reason, struggled year 1, took a jump year 2. This is now a monster year 3 breakout here for QJ, and you got to feel good for him. Then I'm going to go with someone who I really liked coming into the season. Kind of a rough start just with injury, but it is going to be Xavier Worthy. I think this is about as good of a return as you could have expected for Worthy. He gets targeted 8 times, catches 5 of them for 83 yards, also gets 2 carries on the ground for 38 yards. He was getting the creative usage. He was ripping off big plays, didn't get into the end zone, but this was still a very strong fantasy day. And now he's going to have, at least 2 more games here to kind of lock in his workload before we get Rashee Rice back. But got to feel good about Worthy. He is definitely getting fired up in my fantasy lineups once again. And then the last guy in this tier is going to be Courtland Sutton. After a really rough week 2, he's just bounced back. Really nice week 3. Really nice week 4. He scored at least 18 PPR points in 3 of his 4 games this year. Has hit in the touchdown department, 3 touchdowns in 4 games, but he has been someone who's proven he can be a higher touchdown guy. He's the clear-cut number 1 for the Broncos. The Broncos do just have a lot of dudes who can get involved. You got 2 dudes out of the backfield. You have Mims, you have Troy Franklin. They like to use a bunch of different tight ends. So there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, but Courtland Sutton is still the clear-cut number 1 target on this Broncos offense. Then moving into tier 5, we've got Keenan Allen, Michael Pittman, Jalen Waddle, A.J. Brown, and Teteroa McMillan. So for Keenan Allen here, worst game of the season, 8.7 PPR points. He's still the wide receiver 10 in points per game. I'm still very in on this Chargers offense. The volume's going to be there. The targets are concentrated between their top options. Keenan Allen, wide receiver 16. Up next, I have Michael Pittman going up against the Raiders. He's the wide receiver 13 in points per game, hitting in the touchdown department, 3 touchdowns in the first 4 games. I don't think that pace is going to stick rest of season. The Colts do love rushing the ball when they get near the goal line, but Pittman's the wide receiver 1. Daniel Jones, maybe you could say he came back down to earth. I just think overall, that performance looks very different if Adonai Mitchell doesn't have that. I don't even want to say boneheaded, because I don't think he was celebrating and dropped the ball. He just really flubbed it, where you have a deep touchdown turn into a touchback, pretty much a turnover. So I'm not worried about this Colts offense. I think actually really hanging in there against the Rams is a good sign. Pittman's a nice wide receiver too, especially with the buys. Then I'm going to have Jalen Waddle. I do think he gets a big bump with Tyreek Hill now done for the season. That was an extremely gruesome injury. Really sucks for Hill. I mean, that could really be career ending at his age, kind of a smaller wide receiver who relies on athleticism. But now Jalen Waddle is going to have the opportunity to step in, be the wide receiver one. And this is some of the upside that I was talking about coming into the season, with Jalen Waddle having these like contingent outcomes where he could be a really strong pick. I think the main point I was talking about was like Tyreek Hill potentially getting injured, but also him kind of falling off, getting older, potential injuries. Now Jalen Waddle is going to be the wide receiver one. He can get a lot of these kind of manufactured designed looks, and I think he could be a really nice fantasy option rest of season. Then I'm going to go with AJ Brown. Super disappointing. I mean, you can't really put it any other way. 8.8 PPR points. He has scored under 8 points in 3 of his 4 games this year. I will say, though, the silver lining, last 3 games, he has been getting involved from a target perspective. 8, 10, and 9 targets in those last 3 games. AJ Brown, throughout his entire career, has been this ultra efficient wide receiver. He has been extremely inefficient this year. I do think there's going to be some serious positive regression here, but I'm also not willing to just like pencil that in for this specific week. I do think there will be a bounce back, but like 4 games into the season, he's been wildly inconsistent. I'm going to have to see it before I like launch him back up my rankings, but this is not me making the case that I think like AJ Brown is doomed. I think rest of season, he could very easily end up being a wide receiver one, but the Eagles offense just kind of has to get their stuff together. And then the last guy in this tier is going to be Tetairoa McMillan. I really do think I could be ranking Tet like in the wide receiver one area if he was just in a better situation. Like I think in a different landing spot, different quarterback, different offense, he could be in this tier 3 with Emeka Egbuka. Like he's logged 4 pretty solid games, 5 for 68, 6 for 100, 3 for 48, 4 for 62. He just hasn't gotten into the end zone. There's limited touchdown upside. The quarterback play is just not great. So he's kind of settling in as more of like a mid to back end wide receiver 2. Now looking at tier 6, going to start off this tier with Juwan Jennings. And you might be wondering at this point, where is Ricky Pearsall? I don't think Pearsall is going to play on Thursday. He, was in and out of that game on Sunday. I think he's dealing with a PCL injury, like a minor one. But Thursday night football, really quick turnaround. If Pearsall is deemed healthy enough to play, I mean, he's been balling. I think you could consider him in like the tier 4, tier 5 area. But if he doesn't play, I think a banged up Juwan Jennings is still an interesting option. Like he led in routes in week 4, didn't really do a ton, but there's just no one to throw the ball to. I think he'll get nice volume, and I think he'll be a strong option if Pearsall is unable to suit up. Then we're going to go with Marvin Harrison Jr., and this really was like a roller coaster Thursday night football game. It was like all-time bad in the first half, but then he really made some nice plays in the second half, ended with a solid stat line, 6 receptions, 66 yards and a touchdown, was targeted 10 times. But then you can also probably attribute the 2 interceptions to Marv in that first half. I'll give him a little bit of grace on the first one where it looked like he stopped his route. It's kind of like this weird miscommunication where I think he thought Kyler was going to start scrambling, and so he was like getting ready to alter his route to Kyler's scramble, but Kyler throws it and it looks like he just gives up on the route. Pass there. The next one was like completely Marv's fault. Kyler hits some perfect pass on a slant. Marv fumbles it around, turns into an interception. That's tough. You just have to hope he's gotten his confidence back. Like, that's been a big issue. And from someone who's like trying to rank him for fantasy, it's tough to can't really put numbers to that. Like if someone has the yips or they're just not trusting themselves, it's tough to know when they're going to bounce back. And was that enough? Was that second half enough for all of a sudden he's going to look a lot better moving forward? I think it remains to be seen. I will kind of just make a point where this has been an all-time bad start to the season for these second-year wide receivers. Like the rookie wide receiver class last year, it was insane, right? You had Malik Neighbors, wide receiver 1 for fantasy, Brian Thomas Jr., wide receiver 1 for fantasy, Ladd McConkey, wide receiver 1 in the second half of the season. Marv, underwhelming considering his expectations, but still a very fine rookie year. You're looking at those guys now. BTJ, been a disappearing act. Ladd McConkey, disappearing act. Malik Neighbors, out for the season with the torn ACL. Marv hasn't exactly taken that year 2 leap. It really kind of goes against a lot of what we've learned over the last few years and just throughout the entirety of the NFL, where it's if these rookies pop right away, you want to be invested in them. And so far, that has been the wrong call this season because it has just not worked for these second year wide receivers. So Mars, my wide receiver 22. Hope he keeps it rolling like we saw in that second half. Wide receiver 23, going to go with Chris Olave. This was his first game where he didn't command just like an insane number of targets, but he does get into the end zone to kind of save his fantasy day. Also gets dinged with that like interception on the Philly special, which was tough. I think at one point he had 0 receptions and like -2 points from that pick, which obviously wasn't ideal. Bounced back a little bit there in the second half. But on paper, this is a really strong matchup. The Giants are allowing the second most points per game to wide receivers. Chris Olave is still averaging over 10 targets per game. I think this is a good spot for Olave. Then I'm going to go with Brian Thomas Jr. going up against the Chiefs. He's been underwhelming. I will say he hasn't had any like just nuclear bad games. Like he's still averaging 9 points per game, but he hasn't hit 60 yards yet. He's been consistently like not good, but I still think he's the top target on this team. I do think it could turn around at any point. You do have a lot of fantasy relevant wide receivers on bye, like good ones, DK Metcalf, Drake London, you've got Roma Dunze on bye. So he does get a little bit of a bump here. And then you're looking at the guys behind him and it's like, none of these other dudes seem like they have super high ceilings. So wide receiver 24 is kind of where I'm fine slotting in BTJ. And then a similar thing for Ladd. I was very much in the camp of like, it's a 3-game sample size. I still think Ladd's going to be the wide receiver 1 here rest of season. Like Quentin Johnston, Keenan Allen, they'll be involved, but Ladd was still my pick. Then he goes out in week 4, 6 targets, 1 reception, 11 yards, a couple of passes that he could have potentially brought in. Also had like a costly, I think it was a holding penalty on a 3rd down. So it was not a banner day from Ladd. It was rough. Some people might think this is still like holding on to your priors and not adjusting with me having him at wide receiver 25. I just can't fathom that a player who was so good as a rookie in as good of a situation as he has this year with the Chargers is just going to continue to struggle. Like, I think he's going to come around. If you roster Ladd and you're like, I'm done, I can't play him over some of the dudes I have ranked below, I get it. I'm still going to ride it out here with Ladd, but it has definitely been a concerning start to the season here, just like I talked about with a lot of these other second-year wide receivers. Then I'm going to go with Jacoby Myers. And for someone who has kind of been touted for his weekly safety, his high floor, he has now had back-to-back games with under 10 PPR points. Not great when he's a player who doesn't come with a lot of weekly upside. A couple more guys in this tier, both players coming back from injuries this offseason. We have Stephon Diggs, whose usage was really kind of poor through the first 3 weeks. Like, I think the last 2 weeks, he was between like 50 and 60% route participation, which is just completely unplayable for pretty much any position, but especially wide receiver. He gets a really nice usage bump in week 4. 82% route participation, 7 targets, and a low volume passing game, 6 receptions for 101 yards. Now, it was a weird matchup. It was a blowout against the Panthers. It'll be interesting to see if this usage sticks. He had an 82% route participation, but I believe there's only like 22 dropbacks. So if this is a game where it's probably going to be a pass-heavy game script, is that same route participation going to stick? We'll have to wait and see. But if you do roster Stephon Diggs, like this was a great sign, not just because it was a nice game, but the usage was really, really strong. And then the last guy in this tier, Chris Godwin, made his debut from the ankle surgery. And I think like stat-wise, obviously this was not good, but from a usage perspective, like you couldn't have asked for more than this. He steps right into a starting wide receiver role. There was no ramp-up period, 91% route participation right away. He gets targeted 10 times, only catches 3 of them for 26 yards, but I think it's much more important that he was commanding 10 targets, that he's already locked into like, I guess the wide receiver 2 spot right now with Mike Evans out. So Chris Godwin, I think you feel fine about him, like wide receiver 3 at this point in week 5. And then the 7th and final tier, kind of a weird mixture of guys here. I'll start off with Terry McLaurin. Sounds like he's making progress with that quad injury. It was getting a little concerning there for a moment last week where there's like talk about IR, potentially like season ending stuff. He's seeing like some sort of core specialist, but it seems like he'll be back sooner rather than later. I'm not like positive he's going to play this week, but if he does, he's in like this mid-tier wide receiver 3 range. Then I have Devonta Smith, super talented wide receiver, but he scored under 10 PPR points in 3 of the 4 games this season. It's also not a good matchup here against the Broncos. Just tough to feel super excited about Devonta Smith. Then I'm going to go with Jordan Addison. Pretty solid debut, had a 3-game suspension, comes out week 4, starting wide receiver snaps, 8 targets, 4 receptions for 114 yards. I will say this game was looking a little bit bleak for him before just like that complete blown coverage in the fourth quarter, but hey, it counts for sure. This is just not a great matchup here against the Browns. The Vikings are tied for the 3rd lowest implied point total this week. They're still just like the quarterback play is questionable, offensive line is questionable. I think Addison is fine, but he has been a player who's been very reliant on touchdowns in his first 2 seasons, and I just don't know if he's going to be able to produce that way like this year just with this current offensive environment. Then I'm going to go with Jameson Williams going up against the Bengals. This has been a really bad start to the season for JMO. I think with where he was drafted, there was an expectation that he was going to be able to take another leap, potentially be more consistent, command more volume. That has not been the case. The dude's caught 10 balls in the first 4 games of the season. Now, he hasn't necessarily hit in the touchdown department like you'd expect, and I do think he's going to have some of those like big play touchdown performances in the future, but the weekly floor is just very, very low. The Lions are tied for the highest implied point total this week, so the opportunities are there. It's just like as a consistent option, he's not really it. Then I'm going to I'll talk about actually both these Bills wide receivers. Khalil Shakir is my wide receiver 33. Keon Coleman is my wide receiver 36. On the season, Shakir is the wide receiver 32. Bills are tied with the Lions with the highest implied point total. Shakir's fine, someone who has a pretty high weekly floor, going to have touchdown upside. And then for Keon Coleman, he had the really strong week 1, and then he scored under 8 PPR points in the last 3 games. Just another guy in this room where the floor is low, but he could have a boom game, especially if he gets into the end zone. And then between those Bills guys, I've got T. Higgins. I mean, just depressing back-to-back games. 1 for 15 in week 3, 3 for 32 in week 4. Just like I talked about with Jamar Chase, I will point out those were both very tough matchups. I think there's going to be better games moving forward, but wide receiver 2 on a bad offense at this point with the quarterback play, it's not great. And then the last guy here, it's going to be Wan'Dale Robinson going up against the Saints. And I thought it would be kind of interesting after his monster week 2. Remember, 8 receptions, 142 yards and a touchdown. Like, could he build on this? He won down the field multiple times. Is that something we could see moving forward? It's not. Week 3 and 4 combined, he's been targeted 9 times for 40 yards. He's just gone back to like that super inefficient, low ADOT guy. However, he now has the opportunity to be the wide receiver 1. Malik Neighbor is very sadly out for the season. So Wan'Dale is now stepping up. I think the issue is like this offense might just be completely terrible. Like I think Jackson Dart looked pretty good, but his weapons are awful. The run game, like maybe you get something. I love Cam Scatabo, but there's only so much like these rookies can do in this offense. So Wan'Dale, you're hoping he gets peppered with targets, but tough to feel better than like back end wide receiver 3. That is going to wrap it up for my top 36 wideouts. I think it's an interesting week. Like I said, you might have to dig a little bit deeper in your bag, your bench, getting some of these depth options. But if you have any other questions, feel free to drop them down below. If there are some players I didn't mention here and you want me to choose between them, I'd love to answer your comments. Thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.